This video is sponsored by Dev Mountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, Dev Mountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time position in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. Hey, what's going on, guys? So in this series, we're going to be building a full stack application with React, Redux, and Django. All right, now this isn't going to be like a really quick cookie cutter tutorial. We're going to jump in and we're going to write quite a bit of code, especially in React and Redux, because the Django API, we're using something called the Django Rest Framework, which is very high level, so we don't have to write a ton of code in order to get what we need as far as functionality. So we'll create a REST API and we'll implement React and Redux, and then we're going to add authentication with tokens. We're going to use something called Django Rest Knox. So there's going to be a lot to this. The application itself will be very simple. It's just a lead manager where we can add leads with a name, email, message. But like I said, we'll have authentication, we'll be able to log in, and each user will have their own leads. So if I create a lead as one user and then log in as another, I won't be able to see or manage the other person's lead. So it's something that I think you'll learn a lot from on both sides, Django and React. So hopefully you enjoy it, and let's get started. Now, this is the documentation for Django Rest Framework, which is very, very in-depth. All the different concepts are here, such as view sets, which we'll be using, serializers, routers, all that stuff. And then this is a tutorial that I kind of base this upon, but this is very simple. They don't use Redux. They don't use authentication. I basically just took this and then built on to it. And they did a lot of things different in here as well. Like they used virtual env. We're going to be using pip env. But what I do want to show you is the way that they implemented React, which is what we're going to do. And it's something different than I've done before. So usually what I would do is I would have a standalone API and then a standalone React single page app, like number 2 here. What we're going to do is have React in its own front-end Django app. Okay, so we're going to create a special app for React where we install Webpack, we install React, React DOM, all that stuff, and then we load a single HTML template and let React manage the front end. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing, and I will put this tutorial link in the description. And then this is another 5-part tutorial with Django and React. And basically, I got a lot of ideas for authentication from part 4 of this tutorial. So if I'm doing something that you don't quite understand, you might want to just take a look at these tutorials, take a look at the documentation as kind of a supplement. All right, so let's jump in. I'm going to open up a terminal, and I just have an empty folder called Lead Manager React Django. So just go to whatever folder that you want to use as your project. And then you want to make sure you have Python 3 installed. I'm going to make this a little bigger. So if I do Python 3 -- version, you can see I have 3.7.0. I believe 3.72 is the latest, but that's fine. If you don't have Python 3, just go to python.org and download and install it. Now, since I have to use Python 3, I have to, why isn't this clearing? I have to use pip3 if I want to install something globally. Now, the only thing I want to install with pip3 is pip env. Because once we have that, that will allow us to create a virtual environment, and then we can install stuff with pip env in that environment. So you just want to run pip3 or pip, whatever one is Python 3, and then pip env. Mine will go really quick because I already have it installed. All right, once you do that, you can just do pip env shell, and that's going to go ahead and create a virtual environment for our project. And it's going to create something called a pip file. So I'm going to actually open VS Code in this directory. And over here you'll see we have a pip file. And this is where all of our packages will go when we install any packages. So I want to install a few things. So I'm going to say pip env. And let's do install Django. We also want Django Rest Framework, and then something called Django Rest Knox, which has to do with token authentication. We'll get into that later. So let's install these 3 things. and you'll see that they're going to get added here to our packages. It's also going to create a lock file with all the dependencies and their versions. And then once that's done, I'm going to generate a new Django app. So I'm going to say Django-admin, and let's say start project. I should say a Django project. A project and an app are two different things in the Django world. So I'm going to call this lead manager. All right, and then over here you'll see that it created a folder called lead manager with a manage.py file. Okay, this manage.py is basically like the CLI for Django. We can create migrations, run the server, all that stuff. So I want to cd into lead manager, and if I do an ls, I should see manage.py. All right, so before we go any further, if you're using VS Code, you want to select the correct environment for your Python interpreter. So just go ahead and do a Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P and start to type in Python, and you'll see select interpreter. And you want to make sure you select the one that has your folder name and then pipenv. Okay, make sure you do that. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to generate a Django app. Like I said, there's a concept of apps, so different parts of your project. And we want one called leads. So I'm going to say Python manage.py start app, and we're going to call this leads. All right, and then that's going to create this folder called leads. Now, whenever you create a new app, you want to go into your core file here, which is called whatever your project is, and go to the settings file. Now in settings, you have this installed apps list, and you just want to add your app to this, so leads. And then since we're using Django Rest Framework, we need to also add Rest Framework. All right, now as far as the database, I'm just going to stick with SQLite, which is the default, just so I don't have to install Postgres or get that set up. But if you want to do that, you can. Just make sure MySQL or Postgres, whatever you want to use, is on your system, and you put in the engine, the password, database name, stuff like that. It's all in the Django docs. All right, so we'll save that. And now what we want to do is go into our leads folder, so our leads app, and we want to create a model. Okay, so the model is basically the different fields that we want. So it's going to be in class form, so we're going to say class, we're going to call it lead, and we want to pass in models.model because we want to be able to use some of the properties, some of the objects and stuff from the core model class. And if you're not that familiar with Python, we don't do this like a C syntax language. We put a colon and then we indent. All right, and then we're going to define the fields we want. So let's do name equals model.char field. That's what I'm going to use, which is just like text. Then I'm going to do a max length of 100. That should be good for the name. And we're going to have an email. So models dot, and there's actually an email field that will validate it as an email, and we'll set a max length for that to 100 as well. Now I don't want to be able to have two of the same lead or the same email for the leads, so I'm going to set this to unique. Okay, so we'll say unique equals true. And again, if you're new to Python, make sure you use a capital T for your Boolean, because that is looked at as a variable. All right, so next we want message, and that's going to be models.char field. We'll do max length of, let's say, 500, and I want this to be optional, so I'm going to say blank equals true. Otherwise, you'll have to put a message. And then finally, we'll do created at, which is going to be a date time field. And I'm going to put inside here auto now add. Whoop, didn't mean to do that. I'm going to do auto now add equals true. That way it'll just add the date automatically. Okay, so let's save that, and that's our model. Now we're creating the model doesn't do anything other than just creating a file. We need to actually create a migration and then run that migration in order to put that table and those columns in the database. So back in our terminal here, we're going to run Python manage.py make migrations leads. Okay, and that's going to create this 0001 initial.py, which you can see is right here, which has all of our fields and stuff. Now, to actually add it to the database, we want to run Python manage.py migrate. And that's going to run all migrations. And Django by default has a bunch of migrations to run because it creates a bunch of default tables for things like users and permissions and stuff like that. All right, so now that we have our database set up, let's start to think about our API. Now, with the REST framework, we create something called a serializer. And serializers, as you can see, allow complex data such as query sets and model instances to be converted to Python data types that can be easily rendered to JSON, XML, and other content types. So this is obviously going to be a JSON API. That's what we want it to serve. So we need to create a serializer to take our model or our query set of leads and turn it into JSON. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but we're going to do something very, very simple, which is right here. Create a serializer class and then a class of meta, basically going to overwrite the class of meta or add to it, set the model to lead, and then set our fields. All right, so let's do that. Let's go into our leads folder, our leads app, create a file called serializers.py. All right, and then in serializers.py, we want to bring in from the REST framework, we want to import serializers. We also want to bring in our lead model, so from leads.models, we want to import lead. Okay, and then we'll create our serializer. So class lead serializer, and we're going to bring in from serializers the model serializer. So that's what we're doing, is we're basically turning our lead model into a serializer, or creating one from it. And we can do that by saying class meta, set our model to lead, which we just brought in above, and then fields. Now we could do fields and we could put like name, email. I'm just going to put all. We can just do this, _all, like that. Okay, so that's our serializer. Now, the next thing we need to do is create our API. So inside the leads folder, I'm going to create a new file called api.py. And in here, I'm going to bring in the model. So from leads.models, we want to import lead. And from the REST framework, we want to import view sets and permissions. All right, and then we also, of course, we want the serializer we just created. So from serializers, we want to import the lead serializer. All right, now let's create our lead view set. Now, a view set it's kind of hard to explain. Basically, it allows us to create a full CRUD API, create, read, update, and delete, without having to specify explicit methods for the functionality. It's kind of like how Ruby on Rails works with resources. And if you want to read more about it, you can go to view sets, and this will give you some more information about it. So we create a view set, and then we don't even have to create explicit routes. We can use what's called the default router and just basically register an endpoint like API/leads, and then we can make GET requests, POST requests, all that stuff. So to create this, we're going to create a class called lead view set, and we're going to bring in from view sets, model view set. And then we need to specify a query set, which is going to be a query that grabs all the leads. So we'll take the model, lead, and then objects.all. That'll get all the leads. And then we need permission classes, which is going to be a list, and we just want to say permissions dot allow any for now. We're going to change that later so that you can only access your own leads, but for now it'll just be wide open. And then we need to just specify a serializer class, which is the lead serializer that we created. All right, so that's it. We'll save that. Now we need to create our URLs. Now if we look in Lead Manager, there's a root urls.py file. Let me just get rid of these comments. And by default, there's the admin, because Django does come with an admin area. We're not going to be using this though. So I'm also going to bring in from Django URLs include, so I can include a separate file. And I'm going to say for the path of nothing, basically the root, I want to include the leads app URLs file. Okay, so leads.urls. And let's see. Actually, you know what? This needs to be in quotes. Okay, so we'll save that. Now, right now, there is no leads URLs file. So we're going to go into the leads folder and create a new file called urls.py. And for you guys that have worked with Django before, you've probably done this. However, we're not going to explicitly create paths like this in this file. We're going to use the router from Rest Framework. So let's say from Rest Framework, we want to import routers. Okay, we also want to bring in from our API file the view set. So lead view set. And then we're going to set a variable called router to routers.defaultRouter. And let's say router.register, because we can register our routes, and the endpoint is going to be API/leads. All right, and then we pass in our view set, and then just a name, which we're going to call leads. And then finally for our URL patterns, okay, so instead of doing this, URL patterns, and then just a list of different paths, we're simply going to set it to router.urls, and that'll basically just give us the URLs that were registered for this endpoint. And that's it. We should have a basic CRUD API. So we can test this out by running our server. Let's clear this up and let's run python manage.py run server. Okay, and as you can see, it's on 8,000. Now I'm going to open up Postman. That's what I'm going to use to make my requests. If you want to use something different, that's fine, but Postman is friggin' fantastic and easy to use. So we can make all types of requests. So I'm going to make a GET request to HTTP localhost :8000/API/leads. Okay, so what we get is an empty array, which is what we should get because we didn't add any leads. So let's open up a new tab and let's make a post request. And let's make a post request to the same URL. However, we're going to add, for headers, we want to add a content type of application/JSON. And then for body, I'm going to go to raw. And let's put in a name. Okay, this is JSON, so we need our double quotes. Can I make this bigger? All right, so name, let's say John Doe. So we have name, we have email. And we have message, which can be anything. I'll just say, please contact John. I don't know. All right, so let's try this out. Let's send, and let's see, we get a 500 error back. Oh, you know what? I believe we have to add an ending slash like that. There we go. So what we get back is a status of 201, which means everything's okay and something got created, and it gives us what was created. It gives us the ID, the name, email, message, and created at. All right, so if you don't want the ending slash, you can add a config value in the settings, but it's fine. I'm just going to leave it. Now, if we want to, let's create one more. We'll say Sam Smith and send. Okay, so now if we go back to this tab and we do a GET request, you can see that now we have two leads inside of our database. Now, if we want to get one of these, we could make a GET request to, let's say, slash and then the ID, so /1, and it gives us John. If we go to 2, it gives us Sam. If we want to delete, we can choose delete, make sure that you have an ID here to delete, and we'll send that along. Gives us the lead back that we deleted, but let's go back to GET and check it out, just API leads. Oh, he didn't get deleted. Let's see, delete leads /2. I don't think that worked. Let's put a slash. Oh, is that why? Yeah, we got to put a slash. So now if we go back to GET leads, whoops. Okay, so that was deleted. So unless you're doing just API leads, you have to put a trailing slash. And if we wanted to update, we could do a put request as well. So we have a full CRUD API, and you can see it was a very small amount of code that we wrote because we used a view set. So I planned on this video being longer, but I think it's a good place to stop just because we've completed just a simple Django REST API. So in the next video, we'll start to implement React. And like I said, we're going to create a Django app called Frontend, and we'll install Webpack, React, React DOM, all the stuff we need to be able to compile a React application in that front-end app. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.